Hello, everybody, and welcome to the From Poverty to Progress channel. The channel is devoted to promoting an awareness and understanding of human progress. My name is Michael Magoon. I'm the author of the From Poverty to Progress book series. Today, I'm going to continue my multi-part series on why ideologies threaten progress. If you haven't seen the first episode, I would recommend going there first. Before I go on to new material, however, I want to recap just a few key points that I made in the first episode. In this channel, I'm advocating for what I call the progress-based perspective. And that consists on a few key points. One, that human material progress is a fact, and it has brought enormous benefits to humanity. Two, we need to study the past to identify the causes of that progress. We need to do more of what works and do less of what doesn't work. And above all, we need to focus relentlessly on results within the constraints of constitutional rights and basic human decency. Ideologies conflict with the progress-based perspective for a few key reasons. First of all, in order to make the world a better place, we must first understand how the world actually works. We can't focus just on what we want the world to be. Two, the most significant barrier to our understanding of the world are our own preconceived notions. All human beings are biased, and it's oftentimes very difficult for us to recognize those biases. So in order to promote a better world, we need to actively fight against our own preconceived notions. And three, ideology is the mother of all preconceived notions. There's nothing more powerful in deluding people's minds than an all-encompassing ideology. Therefore, ideologies are the most significant threat to future progress. Now, I believe the concept of progress is exactly the opposite of most ideologies. The concept of progress can explain many of our most important questions in a way that's far more persuasive than most ideologies. For example, the concept of progress can explain why the bulk of the human experience has been one of poverty, how and why a few societies invented progress, why that progress has gradually spread across the globe, why many societies are still mired in poverty, and finally, how societies can experience greater progress. To fully understand progress, we need to understand what are the main constraints on progress, both today and in the past. The single biggest one is geography, in particular geographical constraints on food production that limited the type and the amount of food that society could produce. Those constraints on food production place fundamental limits on what type of society could evolve in a specific area. For most of human history, human beings were slaves to geography, just like all other biological organisms. But we were able to invent new food production technologies, particularly agriculture, that enabled us to partially overcome those geographical constraints. Unfortunately, that only revealed a second constraint to progress, and that is that greater food production led to more babies. And the babies ate away the excess food, so we're right back where we started. Even more important is that as agriculture got more productive, extractive institutions in agrarian societies, in other words, agricultural societies, diverted the food surplus towards increasing the income and status of elites who controlled those institutions. So that food surplus didn't go for the benefit of mankind. It went for benefiting a very small elite. In addition, there have been some other important constraints on progress. Geographical distance. It's very hard to copy the innovations of people if you never come into contact with them. And cultural difference. We tend to copy other cultures that are more similar to us. For example, Americans are much more likely to copy the British and the Canadians than they are to copy Indians or Africans or other cultures. Fortunately, a few key societies in Northwest Europe had unique geography that enabled them to invent the first progress. This is in northern Italy, what's now Belgium, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. The Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom then turbocharged that progress. And most importantly, The industrial technologies that were invented in the Industrial Revolution, primarily by the British, but also by Americans and Germans, enabled previously poor societies to overcome geographical constraints that had previously trapped them in poverty. So while human beings throughout virtually all of our history were trapped in poverty, now suddenly they had a chance to get out of it because of the innovations of a few key societies. But that leaves open a few unanswered questions. Why isn't every society prosperous? Why are there some subnational groups, whether it's race, ethnicity, or religion, that are less prosperous than other groups in the same society? Why are some individuals within the same society less prosperous than others? How can nations, subnational groups, and individuals become prosperous? These are some of the most important questions of our time, and I do not believe that social science or historians have adequately answered these questions. But there is one group that believes they have answered those questions. Those are the ideologues. They believe, I think they're incorrect, but they believe that they have answered these key fundamental questions, and they have unlocked a key of human history. And they know how to create a much better society. Because of these ideologies, we now face a new threat to progress. Because even though they believe they're making the world a better place, they're actually doing the opposite. Ideologues on both the left and the right are hostile to the idea of progress. They both subscribe to the doctrine of things are bad, they're getting worse, and those other people are to blame. They focus on explaining differences of outcome, while ignoring the concept of progress that I focus on in this channel. Since 1917, progress has been under threat by ideologies on both the left and the right that seek to radically centralize power and subordinate all decisions within society to ideology. If you look at it from a progress-based perspective, though, we should be decentralizing power, and we need to focus on results, not on ideology. So in some ways, the progress-based perspective is an anti-ideology. It's exactly the opposite of most prevailing ideologies. And that's also why I think it works. One thing that we've seen over the last century is a radical expansion of politics into private life. Politics is no longer about making incremental changes to redistribute the gains of progress. Politics is no longer contained to elections. It is now a zero-sum ideological combat that focuses on identity and resentment. Now, some people say, well, what about religion? Well, I think it's part of this conversation. I think there are some very real similarities between religion and ideology. But there are also some important differences. Throughout human history, religion was the principal means by which humans determined what is moral and what is immoral. But with the expansion of science in the 19th century and technological innovation, a lot of the moral certainty that was a part of religion has been eroded. What many people hoped is that religion would be replaced by science, logic, and reason. Unfortunately, that is not what's happened. Ideology, particularly left-wing ideology, is increasingly replacing religion among educated people in Western nations. In their worldview, it is ideology that increasingly dictates what is moral and immoral. And it also explains what the proper role of government and society should be. This is the clear difference between religion and ideology. Most religions clearly differentiate between the sphere of governance and morality. It's very clear in Christianity, in Judaism, and Buddhism. It's a little less clear in Islam, but there still is a differentiation. But almost all ideologies lack that constraint. Ideologies advocate for using the power of government to create a more just society, even if it means compelling others who do not share that vision to comply. One of the famous quotes from Karl Marx is that religion is the opium of the masses. In other words, the elites have controlled religion in order to keep down the people. I think that's an exaggeration, but there is some truth to that. Typically in the past, the great enemies of progress were centralized, extractive institutions designed to satisfy the material interests of elites. Elites have often co-opted religion to justify the elite material interest. Religion isn't about what the elite wants, but elites have been able to co-opt it. Today, the enemies of progress are extractive institutions designed to satisfy the ideological interests of the affluent. I believe that ideological movements in the wealthy Western nations are the most serious threats to future progress. Now, I'm not saying that all these people want to destroy progress. Some do. I think most of them believe to one extent or another in progress, or at least believe it's a good thing. The problem is what they want to implement undermines the foundations, the necessary preconditions of progress. Some of them do it deliberately, and some of them do it accidentally. Ideological movements on the left within the United States, which has been the engine of progress for over 150 years, are particularly concerning. So I want to get into a little bit to explain how ideologues think. A lot of people think there are great differences between ideologies on the left and the right. And yes, there are some differences, but I think if you look at them closely and you boil it down to some of their key assumptions, there are actually some very real similarities across all ideologies, particularly radical ideologies. They have a very simplistic worldview that consists of a few key points. One, ideologues on both the left and the right divide everyone into groups based upon some demographic characteristic. The group might be based on ethnicity, race, class, gender, religion, sexuality, or nationality, but they all divide people into demographic groups. The groups differ from ideology to ideology, but categorization is constant to all of them. 2, these groups are locked in a zero-sum struggle where they can only gain at the expense of the other groups. So to the extent they believe in progress, progress is about power and domination. It's enabling one group domination over another group. Each group is designated as either good or bad. The bad groups typically are successful people, while good groups are less successful. Now, that's not always the case, but it's pretty typically the case that the ideologues believe that they're fighting for the oppressed against more powerful people. The bad people achieve their success by doing bad things to the good people. And the good people have done poorly because of the terrible thing that bad people have done to them. So this neatly describes all of the differences in outcome that I mentioned earlier. It's not due to geography. It's not due to economics or technological innovation or different view systems. It's about bad people hurting the good people. And of course, you want to be on the side of the good people, right? 5, individuals do not exist, only groups. The actual characteristics, actions, or beliefs of the individuals within each group are irrelevant. And this is pretty important to their whole worldview. If they get started thinking about all the individual differences within each one of the groups, then their whole view system collapses. So they can't do that. They have to focus on the groups only. 6, the goal of the government is to punish the successful group while boosting up the unsuccessful group. Progress, to the extent that they believe in it, consists of redistribution, punishment, and shame. 7, and here where it gets particularly dangerous, all the previous claims are self-evident and beyond discussion. Anyone who disagrees with any of these claims is one or more of the following: stupid, corrupt, or immoral, or some combination of those 3. My guess is you have come across these kind of people many of times in your life. Now think back. Does their behavior and their terminology seem to fit in with these 7 key assumptions? I think you'll find that it will. And this is not a very good way to create a better society. Now, I want to point out that most people who support an ideology do not understand the assumptions that the ideology is built upon. This is very important. A lot of people join an ideology, think it makes sense to them, and they don't really understand what that ideology was about. And I think that's becoming increasingly common. In fact, a lot of the leaders of an ideology don't want you to know what those assumptions are, because then you'd start to question, well, gee, wait a minute, maybe those assumptions aren't true. Once you start questioning the assumptions, the whole value system collapses. Most people follow an ideology because other people around them do so. This may be people in their family, it may be in their community, in their metro area, or it may be people who they affiliate with in social media. But people tend to not think very carefully about the ideology. They just absorb the terminology and repeat it. Now, when you talk with these people, many of the supporters will actively reject the very assumptions that their own belief system is built upon, because they don't realize that their viewpoint is based on these assumptions. They'll say, yeah, that's not correct. I don't believe that. That is often a way to leveraging them away from their ideologies. There are many people who believe in ideologies. You cannot have a rational discussion with them. It's impossible. But there are many, many people who you can have a rational discussion with because they don't really believe in those assumptions. And discussing those assumptions is a great method to red pill, as the term is used today, those people. Now, it's important, if you're going to do that with a stranger, you're probably not going to get anywhere. But if you talk to someone who you already have a personal relationship with, and you're subtle, you're not aggressive, you don't come across as you're attacking their whole worldview, you can convince them slowly that the assumptions upon which their value system is built are incorrect and that they should change their mind. So now I want to explain why the ideologues are incorrect. All of the 7 assumptions that we saw before are extraordinarily incorrect and a very dangerous view of human history. We do not improve our lives from zero-sum group struggle. That's just not how it works. Life is not a zero-sum game. Life is a positive-sum game where anyone who wins helps other people. And we can all have a better life by promoting progress and upward mobility. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail in this video on how to do that. I'm going to have tons of other videos on that. But I want you to be aware that there is a different way of viewing the world. Zero-sum group struggle leads you nowhere. They may be wrong, but that doesn't necessarily mean they undermine progress. Here's why I believe that ideologues undermine progress. First of all, ideologues invariably want to massively centralize power in the state. They don't like decentralized governments. They want to increase the power of the central government, and they want to expand the central government into many other spheres where it previously wasn't. Why is this a problem for progress? Well, it gets back to the 5 keys to progress that I argue for. If you haven't seen the videos on it, I introduced the concept in my intro series. I want to focus here on the 3rd key to progress, which is decentralized political, economic, religious, and ideological power. It is of particular importance that elites are forced into transparent, nonviolent competition that undermines their ability to forcibly extract wealth from the masses. This also allows citizens to freely choose among institutions based upon how much they have to offer to each individual and society in general. Now, the ideologues don't want you to make that choice. They want to give you one choice, their choice, and that's it. Now, it's possible they're right. Occasionally they will be right. But in general, when you massively centralize power, you're undermining the critical preconditions of progress. Because progress primarily comes from a society self-organizing, experimenting with solutions, and then copying the solutions that work, a centralized government driven by ideology inherently attacks the very foundations of progress. Now, that doesn't mean everything that kind of government will undermine progress, but it does mean that in general, it will undermine progress, and they can't stop themselves because they believe they are creating a much better world. But that's not the only reason why ideologies undermine progress. Ideologues also systematically undermine the upward mobility of people who have less. Ideologues deliberately provoke anger and resentment against the successful, which undermines the desire of the less prosperous to copy what works. Copying what works is central to the progress-based perspective. And if you believe that everyone who succeeded is immoral, then you're not going to copy them. There is a golden rule of success. It doesn't matter whether you want to be an athlete, a scientist, an engineer, a welder, or a plumber. There's a golden rule of success in that copy the successful. Although it's not always easy to know exactly what actions are most important to copy, the best place to start is always to copy the successful. That's exactly what ideologues don't want you to do, and therefore they undermine your possibilities of success in your life. So why do these beliefs persist? If they're so contrary to reality, why is it that so many people fall for what ideologues say? I believe a big part of that is that there is no persuasive counterargument to the claims of ideologues. I do not believe that there is anything in social science or a rival ideology that adequately answers the questions that we talked about before. I believe that promoting an awareness and understanding of progress is the counter-argument against these ideologies, and I would argue it's the only counter-argument against them. Now, I've covered the concept of progress a lot in other episodes. I'll just give a quick definition here. It is the sustained improvement in the material standard of living of a large group of people over a long period of time. Progress-based counter-argument says that different outcomes between people are largely accounted for by geographical variation in the distant past, which constrained food production. It's not about what happened today. It's not about what happened a few years ago. It's what happened 1,000 years ago. And I know that seems strange to a lot of people, but we seriously underestimate the impact that geography has had on human history and on societies of today. How a society acquired its food in turn structured their entire society. This resulted in some societies being able to innovate new technologies, skills, and social organizations, and others to not be able to. People that were lucky enough to have good geography have been successful, while those that had bad geography stagnated in poverty for millennia. It's not that the bad people did anything wrong to the good people. It's about the geography that these societies evolved in. Now, fortunately, there's a few key societies that have broken out of those geographical constraints, and the way forward is to copy those societies. Rather than hate the successful, we should feel fortunate that a few societies have been able to break out of these geographical constraints. We should also feel fortunate that industrial societies have innovated technologies, skills, and organizations that enable less successful people to finally overcome their historical constraints. So the very thing that the ideologues object to are the very things that will help the people they supposedly advocate in favor of. For the first time in history, less successful people can go from poverty to progress by copying more successful people in one generation. And we've seen it again and again. Less successful people and those who pretend to speak for them should be grateful that finally a way out of millennia of poverty has been created. All they need to do is copy the successful. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. It's actually very difficult. But the ideologies of both the left and the right get in the way of it happening, and that's why they're so dangerous. Ideologues promise shortcuts that enable entire peoples to suddenly jump to another type of society. But there is no evidence from history that this is possible. Even worse, the belief in shortcuts undermines what does work, a vast decentralized problem-solving network that is modern society. There are no shortcuts. The only proven strategy for success is to copy what has already worked. Dreaming up better pathways to success will lead us nowhere. And that's exactly where the ideologues are going to push us if we do not fight back with a progress-based perspective. Well, you've gotten to the end of this video. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, don't forget to subscribe and like. If you'd like more resources, I would recommend going to my author website, FromPovertyToProgress.com. With a free email subscription, you get free ebook samples, free audio samples, and discounted prices on ebooks and audiobooks. If you insist on paying full price, you can purchase my books at Amazon and Ingram Spark, or audiobooks at Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. If you would like to go into more detail on the concept of progress, I would recommend my library of online book summaries at techratchet.com, which consists of about 280 book summaries on technology, history, economic growth, and progress. So you got to the end of the video. Now it's time for the free book giveaway. I am giving away a digital copy of my first book, From Poverty to Progress. Now, the rules are the same. You know what they are. If you don't know what they are, please pause and read this description. We have a book giveaway every week. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.